This video is sponsored by War Thunder. What the hell does a Space Force even do? With a title like that, you think I'm about to go on an old band yelling at cloud style rant about how back in the day we fought wars on the ground with sticks and rocks like men, but nay, because I think the Space Force is actually pretty cool. And you will too by the end of this video, which is a plea to watch the entire video so that YouTube doesn't just nuke my channel. I'm going to be breaking down where the idea of a Space Force even comes from, why have it, and now that they've been around for a few years, what have they actually been doing this whole time? And what does fighting in space even look like in today's current year? But first, a bit of necessary evil, so I do not starve to death. I'm going to talk about today's sponsor, War Thunder. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, and is now available free on PC, consoles, and mobile devices. You take control of over 2,500 different tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships from 10 different nation factions, covering everything from 20th century warfare all the way to the latest and greatest main battle tanks of today. Immerse yourself in the intense combat gameplay of War Thunder, playing with incredibly detailed vehicles, cutting-edge graphics, and realistic sound effects that make you feel like you too are a poorly educated, overly caffeinated vehicle commander just like I was. Join a worldwide community of over 70 million players in epic PvP battles today, and delve into the breathtaking experience that is War Thunder. With an unmatched wealth of high-quality content to discover, there's simply no better game suited for fans of military history. Personally, I love the X-ray views and sophisticated vehicle damage because it gives you a much better idea of how vehicle combat actually works, instead of some generic hitbox health percentage system. You'll see how each different weapon system on the thousands of different vehicles each have very distinct effects on your target and the poor sods trying to crew them. The game is highly optimized, letting people even on a potato PC and Goodwill thrifted keyboard play this game with insane visuals, no lag, and those juicy high frame rates we all love to brag about. You can play arcade style for those simple to play, fast-paced matches, realistic mode if you're wanting a bit more intensity, and finally simulator mode that, short of a court-appointed alimony, is the closest to being a real-life military vehicle crew member as you're going to get. Add in tons of customization options and you have yourself a good time any day of the week. And now you can play the all-new mobile version on iOS and Android, meaning you can play War Thunder anywhere you bring your phone or tablet. The new mobile app offers all the same great graphics, gameplay, and intuitive controls with the convenience of not having to lug your PC or game console around. And best of all, you're going to love this, you can play War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and mobile. Just make sure you use my links in the video description or pinned comment to sign up. If you make a new account or haven't played in 6 months, you'll also receive a massive bonus pack with lots of awesome kit for PC and consoles to give you a head start against the people who don't watch my videos. Besides 3 premium vehicles, you'll also receive a 50% experience and income booster, 2 advanced vehicles for rent, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium account time, among other things. The offer is available for a limited time only, so don't forget to claim it now. Thank you again to War Thunder. Now back to the video. Space Force, the 8th branch for the final frontier. When you think Space Force, your brain might conjure up ideas like drop pods, battling Russians on the moon, or space shuttle door gunners. And while eventually this might be on the horizon for the youngest service branch, right now things look a little different. Only having 9,400 personnel at the time of this recording, and seemingly still trying to figure out how to make a cool dress uniform that doesn't look like it belongs in Spaceballs. They might be a small group, but they have a much bigger history than most people who laugh at the idea of a Space Force probably know about. During the mid to late 20th century, satellites became more important to the entire spectrum of conflict. And when you have expensive chunks of metal that are important to fighting a war, naturally they and the effects they bring are going to be targeted. Additionally, as missile technology advanced, more and more payloads were entering space and outside of what we think is typical air defense ranges. Whatever you think a typical air defense range is, I know that's like a personal decision everyone has to make. Back in Vietnam, spacecraft operated by the Air Force provided weather data and communication support, and the Space Delta 6 unit was stationed at Nha Trang Air Base from 1965 to 1971. Since then, some form of space asset has been used in every single American conflict since. The Air Force set up its first space command in the 80s along with the Strategic Defense Initiative, also known as the Star Wars program. Their goal, in short, was to remove the mutually part of mutually assured destruction by just shooting down any ICBMs that Russia managed to launch at us. Congress was actually playing around with the idea of creating a Space Force based branch way back in the 90s, back when they couldn't decide between Space Force or Space Corps. I like Space Corps better, but That's just me. It wasn't until the late 2010s that China and Russia really started ramping up their own space domain operations that the idea started coming around and being taken seriously. But like many other government programs, they had to overcome a big problem first. See, by the 2010s, each branch essentially had their own space force. In the same way, it's easier for the Navy and Marines to have their own fleet of aircraft that aren't just part of the Air Force. It was easier for each service to have their own organic, dedicated sections to stay worried about satellites and exo-atmospheric threats. The problem in that is that you basically had each branch pouring money into space, literally sometimes, towards the exact same problem. Instead of just one office trying to provide support, you had a dozen, all doing the exact same thing, but costing 10 times as much overall. So if you're one of those people who think we are wasting money by having a space force, just keep in mind we were wasting even more money by not having one at all. In 2020, Congress passed the National Defense Authorization Act that officially created the Space Force under the Department of the Air Force, with the plan that eventually it would become separate entirely from the Air Force. Sorry, Marines, maybe your day will come eventually. The official statement of the Space Force is, and I quote, "Secure our nation's interests in, from, and to space." Very cool, but what does that actually mean? Well, the actual codes that set up the Space Force in the first place are equally vague, and the phrase you'll constantly see is space operations. But what exactly is a space operation? Is it this? It's not, but it could be. Maybe if Hasbro would just pull their head out of their ass. What is a space operation? Well, it's kind of like asking the Army what land operations are, or the Air Force what air operations are. The only answer you're going to get is a broad gesturing at everything, so let's break things down a little bit more. First is just satellite operations. Positioning, navigation, and timing, aka P&T, aka GPS for the rest of us. Fun fact, if you didn't know, GPS was made for the Department of Defense, and eventually granted access for free to us plebeians. Thank you, military-industrial complex. I love you. But it's not just GPS, because the military uses satellites for communications and for spying on bad guys doing bad things. Or, you know, from a non-cultural relativist perspective, they're bad guys doing bad things. Anyway, kind of tied into controlling satellites for the DoD is making sure they actually stay in space and working. In case you were just starting to come to peace that our terrestrial environment is doomed from man-made pollution, us humans have created roughly 170 billion pieces of debris that are currently flying around orbit, each at approximately 18,000 miles per hour. This is not good. A 1-inch aluminum screw in orbit, if it were to hit a satellite, would carry the equivalent force of strapping a pound of TNT to the side of it and blowing it up. Making sure that a chunk of decommissioned space shuttle doesn't slam into one of our shiny spy satellites is called Space Domain Awareness, or SDA, and it's one of the primary jobs of the Space Force. They track millions of pieces of debris in space, as well as other operational satellites up there, and ensure that nothing that isn't supposed to touches. Wish they had that in my grade school gym class locker room, but that's a discussion for a different time. But it's not just random space debris that they're looking for. See, while we haven't seen a full-on space war yet, satellite warfare will eventually absolutely be a thing. Multiple countries have already proven the ability to take them down fairly consistently, and it's up to the Space Force to try to keep our expensive chunks of silicon and titanium from blowing up and joining the other 170 million pieces of floating debris. And they have a pretty wide variety of ways they can keep that from happening, like jamming, decoys, stealth coding, or by using the onboard thrusters and just hoping for the best. That said, one of the easiest ways to protect a satellite from an incoming missile is to just shoot it down in the first place. See, along with actually operating the satellites, early warning missile detection is probably the most important task given to the Space Force. Without getting too into the weeds of things and not breaking any NDAs, I probably still have to honor the Space Force is able to detect pretty much anything with a rocket motor, short of that one bottle rocket your dad gave you after he tried to reconnect with you after he left to get milk and cigarettes 20 years ago. But basically just everything. Whether it's missile testing in the backwoods of North Korea, an Iskander launch in Russia, or that one guy who accidentally offed himself while trying to prove that the Earth is flat, the American government wants to know what rockets and missiles are being fired, where, and by whom. One of the biggest factors that comes into intercepting any kind of missile is time. The earlier you detect something, the higher the likelihood you can pop it before it hits something important. Now, all of this is probably not surprising and is likely something you've already heard about, but what are the cool stuff that our space brothers and sisters actually doing? Enter space supremacy. Just like land, sea, and air, space is just as much a place that wars are fought. Just like we don't want an adversary to be able to fly their planes around the air willy-nilly, we don't want them to be able to access their space assets either, or even be able to send stuff into space in the first place. In short, we want to make sure we can use our stuff but they can't use their stuff. According to this very fancy document released by the Space Force that includes fun infographics, lots of triangles, and pictures of Space Force Guardians with that one blue filter we all used back in 2012. By the way, Guardians as the name of your service member, I get it, but it needs some work. Don't even get me started on them wearing camouflage and combat boots. Anyway, according to the document, there are 3 primary roles that fall under space supremacy: electromagnetic warfare, space battle management, and probably the coolest one, orbital warfare. And that last one just gets my jimmies all riled up. We'll start with electromagnetic warfare. This is centered around spectrum control, not the spectrum that makes it so that me and probably you cannot talk to women, but the electromagnetic spectrum as the name implies. The EMS is the bread and butter of space operations. Communications, satellite imagery, network connections, GPS, it all sits somewhere in its own little niche on the spectrum. If something lives on the EMS, it can be jammed, blocked, diverted, hacked, you name it. And if any one of those services I just described goes down, you're going to have issues. No more satcoms, no more battle space management, no more strip clubs near me on Google Maps. It's all kaput. EM warfare at its core is just like everything else in a fight. Make sure ours are hardened against attacks while simultaneously attacking those of the people we're fighting. Now, 2 satellites trying to jam and counter jam each other isn't the most interesting thing to watch, but just use your imagination, I promise it's cool. Next in space supremacy is battle space management, and this is probably the most boring of the 3, so I'm gonna keep this quick. But space battle management is basically knowing where all of our things are and knowing where the bad guys' things are, and then managing it, making sure you don't leave an opening for attack against your own space assets and the such, while simultaneously looking for weaknesses in your opponent. If normal ground fighting is like a game of chess, then space battle management is like those 3D chess sets that have the weird layers. Naval combat is still just battleship. Now, the actual moving of those weird 3D chess pieces is going to fall under the category of orbital warfare. This includes stuff from the ground being shot at space targets and space targets shooting at other space targets. The actual first recorded bit of space warfare already happened. On October 31st, 2023, the Houthis launched a ballistic missile at Israel. Right as it got out of the atmosphere, it got spanked by an Arrow 2 interceptor, making it technically the first time 2 bits of opposing military hardware bumped uglies in an exo-atmospheric setting. Now, back in the day, a lot of people figured that satellites would be a great launching platform for nukes and other things, but because of some things like the Outer Space Treaty and the fact that orbital mechanics don't care about where you want to aim a missile or anything of that matter, it never really worked out. While one can imagine a future where aircraft with higher and higher ceilings eventually get to the point where they can dual operate in atmosphere and in vacuum, we aren't there yet. So what does just full-on kinetic space warfare actually look like today? To answer that question, all we need to do is look at Exercise Space Flag. It even has its own little logo. This is the only large-scale force-wide exercise the Space Force community currently conducts. It's the CTC rotation for the Space Boys. Space Flag is run by the Space Training and Readiness Delta Provisional or STAR D group, and they run this exercise 3 times a year, with one of them requiring to have other countries like Australia, the UK, and Canada in attendance. Just like other large-scale exercises, there is an entire unit dedicated to being the bad guys, and for this, it's the 26th Space Aggressor Squadron. During this exercise, the Space Force simulates a full-scale war with a peer adversary, read that as China, and it's their job to make sure they don't take out our floating metal bits. During this time, Space Force units attempt to coordinate ground-based attacks against foreign satellites while jamming and disrupting those that aren't targeted by a missile. A lot of times, you don't even really have to hit an enemy satellite in order to disable it, or at the very least, make sure it can't do the job it's supposed to do. Different satellites are placed into different types of orbit based on their specific roles, so if one of them has to maneuver to avoid something, it can throw off the orbit enough so that it breaks the communication links with whatever it's trying to coordinate with. Funny enough, though, the takeaway from most of these exercises is that we're all just kind of screwed. One Air Force official after a 2018 iteration of the exercise said the defense of individual satellites is going to become a risky, untenable proposition, which translated from DoD speak means there's really nothing we can do about it. Very few satellites have any kind of redundancy because they're so expensive. So if you take one out, that's it, ability gone, or at least degraded so badly you might as well not have it anymore. His example included taking out missile warning satellites that are in geosync orbit. This means that if one is taken out, the others in the network aren't going to be able to cover that blind spot. Now all you have to do is move your missiles to that blind spot, fire them, and by the time we detect them, it's probably too late. Womp womp. So naturally the Space Force has a long way to go. And it's the first of its kind, so there's gonna be bumps on the road. But I think the future is bright, and we are now one step closer to the first interplanetary war between the United Earth government and the Martian Confederacy. Thank you for watching. Make sure you check out today's sponsor, War Thunder. Let me know what you want to see next in the comment section, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.